A cold mist hung over the Bavarian foothills the morning the workers broke through the concrete. The site had been slated for redevelopment, an old cable factory abandoned since the 1950s, but beneath its foundations lay something no one expected. A reinforced vault sealed with bolts, corroded to the color of dried blood. When the first door gave way, the stench of oil, paper decay, and metal filled the air. Inside, a crate marked with the faded eagle insignia of the Third Reich bore a single word in block letters: Ascherfall. Within hours, the police had cordoned off the site. Within days, German federal archivists and NATO liaisons arrived under the cover of night. What they found inside that chamber, film reels, chemical canisters, and carbon-stained blueprints, would reopen a chapter of history both sides had tried to erase. They called it Operation Ashfall, and for 77 years, it had remained buried not just beneath concrete, but beneath silence itself. Chapter 1: The Forgotten Files of Operation Ashfall. The official record begins in late October 2022 with the excavation log of a redevelopment project near Garmisch-Partenkirchen, coordinates 47493 degen, 11.095 deg. The area, once part of a small industrial corridor at the base of the Wetterstein Mountains, was being cleared for a new logistics park when the demolition crew struck reinforced concrete 3 meters below grade. The structure wasn't on any regional or wartime registry. What the foreman, Klaus Merner, initially thought was an old storm drain turned out to be a subterranean chamber, its steel hatch welded shut from the outside. Merner's supervisor, suspecting ordnance, halted the dig and notified the Bavarian State Police. By dusk, military engineers had arrived, and the ground-penetrating radar confirmed a rectangular enclosure roughly 8 meters by 6, its interior lined with lead sheeting. A bomb disposal team began cutting through the corroded hatch. When they breached the door, a rush of stale air spilled out, carrying the tang of solvents and rust. Behind the wall of dust and shadow stood an array of shelves, metal warped with age, papers fused into solid blocks, and in the center, a crate stenciled with the German word for ashfall. Inside that crate, catalogued later by forensic archivist Dr. Erika Vogt, were 16 film canisters, 2 sealed glass ampoules containing a grey particulate substance, and several bundles of documents wrapped in waxed cloth. The papers bore the insignia of the Waffen-SS technical branch and the classification stamp Geheime Reichssache, top secret of the Reich. More striking were the signatures at the bottom of each log. Dr. Otto Wenrich, chief geologist, and SS Obersturmbannführer Hans Richter, a name that had appeared in scattered references in Allied archives but never attached to any known operation. Each page was numbered sequentially, but marked with a hand-drawn symbol, 3 downward lines radiating from a circle. The first line of text on the top sheet read, Project Ascherfall, Alpine Atmospheric Weaponization Trials, 1943-1944. The initial discovery was kept from the press. Forensic specialists under Germany's Federal Archives were joined quietly by a NATO historical recovery unit known as the Technical Anomalies Working Group, or TOG, a division usually tasked with identifying old weapons stockpiles. Their preliminary report, labeled TOG 22 BAV Ash, described the material as sensitive, potentially in violation of international conventions on chemical warfare. Samples were transferred to a Bundeswehr containment facility outside Munich, while the documents went to Koblenz for controlled examination. What emerged from those pages stunned investigators. Detailed schematics for dispersal devices, diagrams of modified aircraft pods, and meteorological data tied to volcanic regions in Italy and Iceland. Operation Ashfall, it seemed, was not a battle plan, but an environmental manipulation experiment, a project aimed at controlling ash clouds to serve as delivery mechanisms for toxic agents. By cross-referencing with Allied interrogation reports from 1945, researchers found a chilling correlation. A declassified British file, ADM 23467, referenced a German interest in geophysical atmospheric phenomena as strategic assets. The report noted an abandoned test site near Innsbruck, where unusual particulate residues had been recovered. Those residues, now identified through spectral analysis, matched the composition of the ampoules found in the Bavarian vault. Silicon compounds mixed with trace elements of arsenic and a synthetic fluoride catalyst, materials consistent with early chemical dispersal agents. Dr. Vogt, in her private field notes, wrote, "This is not a weapon in the conventional sense. It is an experiment in turning nature itself into a vector. The ash becomes the medium, the storm, the carrier. Her words echoed what would later be found in a separate binder marked Allied Intelligence Memorandum 1946, Restricted Circulation. That memo, retrieved from NATO archives, confirmed that British and American units had seized parallel documentation and then immediately sealed it under a new classification system. Geophysical Warfare Division, Project GFWD-001. The division itself was quietly dissolved by 1950. No public record of its existence remains beyond a single budget line in the US Department of Defense Appropriations ledger. As the 2022 investigation deepened, attention turned to the 16mm film reels. Restoration specialists at the Bundesarchiv digitized them, revealing a series of test recordings filmed in 1944 at an unknown Alpine facility. The footage showed men in SS uniforms overseeing the release of ash clouds from a hillside rig, each sequence marked by a slate bearing the code AF12 through AF15. Within seconds of release, the film showed localized fog thickening unnaturally fast, obscuring entire sections of the valley. Chemical analysis of the film stock revealed it was coated with a protective nitrate layer uncommon for that period, suggesting the footage was preserved deliberately, not forgotten. Midway through reel number 7, a frame capture revealed signage partially visible in the background. Wehrgeologische Versuchsstation Oberammergau. Cross-referenced with Luftwaffe construction records, this corresponded to a known geological testing site dismantled in April 1945, weeks before Germany's surrender. Post-war aerial photography from Allied reconnaissance confirmed cratering and scorch marks across the area, consistent with controlled detonations or chemical tests. Yet, despite thousands of post-war debriefs, the existence of an atmospheric weaponization program was never once disclosed. Historians speculated that the operation was buried deliberately, not destroyed. The United States and the Soviet Union both absorbed large numbers of German scientists under Operation Paperclip and its lesser-known Soviet counterpart, Operation Osoaviakhim. When records from both programs were re-examined following the 2022 discovery, several names resurfaced, Wenrick among them, listed as missing in action in 1945, but later spotted in a 1948 Soviet research roster. His area of assignment, atmospheric physics, Kirov Oblast. Meanwhile, the TAWG analysts began noticing something far more troubling. Among the pages of Ascherfall's documentation was a single English-language memorandum dated June 1952, bearing the header U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Research Liaison Section. The letter referenced continuation of Alpine dispersal simulations under GWII directive, a clear echo of the Geophysical Warfare Division noted earlier. This discovery suggested that the science behind Operation Ashfall did not vanish with the Third Reich. It was absorbed, repurposed, and hidden beneath a new bureaucratic skin. When confronted by journalists in late 2023, NATO officials dismissed the claims as speculative. However, a leaked internal report from the European Centre for Historical Transparency, stamped ECHR Restricted 2023-11, stated that particulate analyses from archived US weather modification tests in the 1950s bore identical chemical markers to those found in the Bavarian ampules. That report vanished from the centre's website within 24 hours of publication. The deeper researchers dug, the clearer the pattern became. Documents missing from both Allied and Axis archives, experiments disguised as meteorological research, and recurring budget lines under environmental security initiatives. The term Ashfall appeared again and again, sometimes as a code name, sometimes buried as a simple project acronym. One recovered NATO briefing dated March 1962 used the phrase atmospheric vector proliferation risk, ASHPROT 1262, hinting that the original data from Operation Ashfall had not only survived, but evolved into Cold War weather control programs. In late 2024, Dr. Vogt presented her findings to the Bundestag Committee on Historical Integrity. Her conclusion was stark. What we found under that factory was not the relic of a defeated ideology. It was evidence of a scientific lineage that continued, unacknowledged, across generations. The ash did not settle. It spread. Shortly after her testimony, the vault and all its contents were transferred to an undisclosed military facility in Rhineland-Palatinate, under the designation Protective Custody Historical Artifact. Public inquiry requests filed since then have been denied. Independent analysts believe the vault now rests beneath Ramstein Air Base, catalogued under environmental containment, though no government agency will confirm it. Among the few surviving documents from the Bavarian cache is a final note written by an unknown hand, undated, placed at the bottom of the Ascherfall folder. It reads, in German, Der Himmel vergisst nichts. The sky forgets nothing. If that is true, then the story of Operation Ashfall is not one of discovery, but of recognition. The realization that the air we breathe has carried, for decades, the residue of experiments never meant to be known. Somewhere, perhaps deep in another archive, another sealed vault waits. And when it opens, the dust will rise once again. Chapter 2. Beneath the Ice. Station Vostok 13. In 2019, a satellite operated by the European Space Agency registered anomalous radar reflections beneath the Antarctic ice shelf, specifically at coordinates 78.465 dig S, 106.832 dig E, roughly 8 kilometers from the decommissioned Soviet research site known as Vostok Station Complex. 13. The readings suggested a series of symmetrical metallic structures buried nearly 400 meters beneath the permafrost, their composition inconsistent with any known geological formations. When the data was first reported to the Russian Federation's Ministry of Natural Resources, officials attributed it to sensor interference caused by subglacial water pockets. Yet 3 months later, a private research consortium under the name Polar Axis Initiative secured permission to conduct a limited core drilling operation. What they found would unravel one of the Cold War's most enduring secrets. The borehole reached a sealed chamber lined with thick steel plating. Embedded within the walls were Soviet insignia partially corroded by time, the hammer and sickle faint but discernible, and technical markings indicating manufacture by the Leningrad Metal Works. Circa 1960, inside the chamber, researchers discovered a frozen workspace containing radio consoles, magnetic tape reels, and racks of mechanical components preserved in perfect cryogenic condition. The entire site appeared abandoned in haste. Half-eaten rations, scattered logbooks, and a faded photograph of 6 men in heavy parkas posing before a flag reading Zimny Mir, Winter World. The name matched an obscure entry in a 1961 Soviet archive inventory, labeled Project Zimny Mir, Autonomous Reconnaissance Research. Once the initial discovery reached Moscow, the excavation was halted under an immediate security directive. Within weeks, Russian military cargo aircraft arrived at the site, removing most of the recovered material under armed escort. However, several digital photographs and partial document scans had already been transmitted to researchers abroad. These images contained serial numbers, English language annotations, and, most surprising of all, American component stamps. The internal circuit boards carried the imprint, property of RCA Defense Electronics Division, Camden, NJ, USA, a fact that raised eyebrows in both scientific and intelligence communities. How could US technology end up embedded within a secret Soviet installation buried beneath Antarctica during the height of the Cold War? To answer that, historians turned to declassified Soviet communications from the early 1960s, specifically to an encrypted directive labeled CCCP KGB ARCT-01. The text described a joint operation between Soviet scientific engineers and acquired German specialists, focusing on remote environmental monitoring using autonomous vehicles. The language closely paralleled Western programs aimed at developing unmanned aerial surveillance during the same period. Among the personnel listed was Dr. Kurt Eberlein, a former Luftwaffe engineer believed to have been relocated to the USSR after 1945 under Operation Osoaviakim. According to East German intelligence summaries, Eberlein specialized in acoustic and atmospheric sensors, technology essential for early drone control systems. By late 2020, fragments of the Vostok 13 archive began surfacing through anonymous digital leaks. Among them was a scan of a maintenance logbook labeled Zimny Mir Object 13, Engineering Journal, 1959-1961. The pages described a prototype known as Model K4, an autonomous aerial craft, designed for high-altitude endurance and capable of collecting radiation data over polar regions. The K4 was powered by a compact thermoelectric generator, fueled by small quantities of strontium-90, essentially a nuclear battery. Western analysts recognized the design immediately. It matched the long-lost specifications of the US project, Ice Cloud, an experimental reconnaissance drone program. Supposedly cancelled in 1956, the parallels were too precise to be coincidence. The implications became even darker when, in 2021, a British intelligence review of declassified MI6 documents uncovered a communication from the US Air Force to the British Defence Intelligence Staff. Dated February 1961, the message, tagged Top Secret Ekch Antar, requested logistical support for a joint environmental survey near Soviet territory. The operation was reportedly aborted after loss of contact with southern assets. No official explanation followed, and no personnel were ever listed as missing. Yet a year later, Soviet communiques to the Kremlin described enemy drones recovered during polar expedition, claiming successful integration of recovered technologies. If these correspondences were authentic, they suggested an unprecedented exchange, a covert technological encounter between Cold War adversaries beneath the most remote ice on Earth. As the modern inquiry expanded, journalists traced the Polar Axis Initiative back to a consortium of retired defense scientists based in Zurich. Its lead investigator, Dr. Pavel Lukyanov, had previously worked with Russia's Arctic Monitoring Division before defecting to Switzerland in 2014. In a recorded interview for an upcoming documentary, Lukyanov described what he witnessed inside the subglacial vault before it was seized. The machines were not Soviet design. The hulls were composite, too advanced for the 1960s. One still bore a serial tag written in English. They tried to fuse two systems, our metallurgy, their circuitry. It was a hybrid born of rivalry and desperation. Further corroboration came from a declassified Soviet logistic report, file number 1962 ANT-Res 41. It listed shipment manifests for radiothermal generators and experimental flight housings, delivered from Murmansk to Vostok Station via the research vessel Ob. The total cargo weight exceeded standard allocations by 20 tons, with 7 containers logged under non-catalogued experimental assemblies. The following year, the Ob disappeared during a return voyage. Official cause: severe weather event. Unofficially, it carried sealed cargo that was never declared. Modern analysis of the equipment retrieved from the ice has since revealed chilling details. Radiation surveys confirmed localized contamination consistent with decaying strontium fuel. The recovered magnetic tapes, once decoded, contained telemetry data measuring atmospheric density and high-altitude wind drift, parameters critical for long-range unmanned reconnaissance. But one particular tape, marked Test 6 Final, recorded something else entirely. A sudden surge of electromagnetic interference, followed by a burst of static lasting exactly 9 minutes. The log ended abruptly. Engineers analyzing the data noted that such interference could only result from a reactor breach or an atmospheric explosion. No such event was ever recorded in Antarctic logs for 1961. Following these revelations, both the Russian and American governments issued formal denials. Yet in early 2023, a cache of US Navy reconnaissance photographs surfaced via the National Archives digitization project. One image, dated March 1961, showed a faint contrail rising over the Antarctic plateau near the coordinates of Vostok 13. The photo bore the handwritten caption, "Unexplained thermal anomaly, flight path SE-21. Independent analysts have suggested that the contrail could represent the final flight of the K-4 prototype, launched in defiance of international treaties forbidding military activity on the continent. When researchers compared the metadata of these images to Soviet telemetry records, they discovered an almost perfect match in timing and trajectory. Both logs ended at precisely 008:47 UTC on March 16, 1961. The last entry in the Zimny Mir journal read simply, "Contact lost, signal drowned by aurora noise." Today, the recovered artifacts from Vostok 13 remain classified within the Russian Ministry of Defense, under the archive code Karov Ice 13, accessible only to personnel with Level 6 polar security clearance. No physical samples have been shared with international investigators. The Polar Axis Initiative, facing pressure from multiple governments, was formally disbanded in 2022. Dr. Lukyanov has since gone missing. His last communication to a colleague contained a cryptic line, "The ice remembers everything." What truly occurred beneath the Antarctic ice remains obscured by politics and permafrost. But among the few documents that escaped censorship lies a final entry signed by a technician named Mikhail Orlov, dated March 19, 1961. Order to seal station. Objects secured in Vault C. Await retrieval. His handwriting trembles at the end of the sentence, as if written in haste or fear. Vault C has never been found. The discovery of station. Vostok 13 exposes a thread that stretches from the ashes of the Third Reich, through the heart of the cold, war to the melting frontiers of the present day. Beneath the ice, in a chamber built by forgotten hands, lies the proof that neither side fought alone. In the pursuit of dominance, the world's greatest rivals became quiet collaborators, crafting machines capable of seeing everything, yet buried where no one could ever find them, until now. Chapter 3. The Red Room Tapes of Camp Dietrich. The discovery began not in a bunker or battlefield, but in an air-conditioned records room in Maryland. In September 2021, a paralegal named Samantha Nguyen filed a routine Freedom of Information Act request targeting U.S. Army Medical Command's archival catalog. The goal was simple: locate research notes from the 1940s relating to post-war biological decontamination. What the National Archives returned, after months of bureaucratic delay, was a single mislabeled box. The barcode identified it as Agricultural Studies, 1953-1954. Inside, however, the inventory tag read, Omega clearance required, do not duplicate. Nguyen had accidentally stumbled upon material that had not been requested, redacted, or even logged in the federal records system for over 70 years. The box contained 14 canisters of 60mm microfilm, each stored in deteriorating cardboard sleeves, marked with the logo of Camp Dietrich, later renamed Fort Dietrich, the United States Army's principal center for biological warfare research during and after the Second World War. Each reel was hand-labeled with a code, RR1 through RR14. Also inside were chemical data sheets, laboratory rosters, and a brittle typewritten index stamped Operation Red Room. The term was unfamiliar to historians. Absent from both the US Chemical Corps records and the 1946 Geneva Review of Wartime Experimentation, within days, the materials were placed under forensic preservation by the Department of Defense Office of History, and the National Security Archive at George Washington University quietly began an inquiry of its own. When archivists digitized the first reel, what emerged on screen silenced the entire review team. The footage showed a sterile laboratory chamber, white-tiled walls, industrial lamps, and a single observation window. Inside, a man sat bound to a chair, electrodes attached to his temples, a breathing mask strapped to his face. A clock on the wall indicated 02:17. A voice outside the frame spoke. Red Room Trial, Session 12, Subject Omega-4, Compound 21A administered. The man convulsed. The film continued for 6 minutes before cutting abruptly to black. The sequence repeated with different subjects, each labeled numerically, each sequence ending the same way. A single name appeared repeatedly in the margin of the lab notes. Lieutenant Col. S. H. Penbrook, MD, Director, Behavioral Sciences Division. The discovery sent shockwaves through both academic and military circles. Camp Dietrich had long been associated with chemical and biological defense research, but nothing in the public record hinted at human experimentation of this kind. Declassified MKUltra documents from the CIA referenced psychotropic drug testing in the 1950s, yet the Red Room materials predated those experiments by nearly a decade. Researchers began to suspect that Operation Red Room was, in fact, the missing link between wartime Axis experiments and Cold War psychological warfare initiatives. In January 2022, historian Dr. Marcus Leclerc cross-referenced the personnel listed in the Red Room files with post-war government rosters. What he found was deeply unsettling. Several of the names, including Lieutenant Colonel Penbrook, appeared in earlier OSS and War Department documents associated with Project Paperclip, the covert US program that relocated German scientists to America after 1945. Among them was a psychiatrist named Dr. Erich Wollner, formerly attached to the Luftwaffe's Medical Evaluation Unit in Dachau. Allied interrogations of Wollner in 1947 had noted his valuable knowledge of neurochemical tolerance studies. his name appeared again, 2 decades later, in the payroll of Fort Detrick's Behavioral Science Laboratory. Vollner's personnel file was sealed under Special Projects, Compartment 12. The footage from the Red Room reels bore distinctive cinematic characteristics. Identical camera positions, sequential test logs, and timestamp overlays suggesting systematic documentation over multiple months between 1944 and 1948. Each reel concluded with a frame reading Detrick Archive, classified material, reel stored Omega-12. This repeated notation led investigators to a defunct index known as the Omega Registry, a classification category used between 1942 and 1951 for top-level experimental materials deemed ethically or diplomatically compromising. The registry had been officially dissolved in 1952, its assets reportedly destroyed. Yet here was incontrovertible proof that at least one Omega project had survived, and it bore the hallmarks of post-war continuity. By mid-2022, the Department of Defense quietly assembled a joint task team under the cryptonym Horizon Deep, consisting of historians, military ethicists, and intelligence officers. Their internal memorandum, later leaked to journalists, described the Red Room tapes as an early psychopharmacological endurance study, potentially involving enemy combatants or POWs. However, the document's appendix, marked Horizon Deep Annex C, contained several redacted names accompanied by the term Axis assets. Non-voluntary, this phrasing implied that the subjects may have been German or Japanese, prisoners transferred covertly to US custody after 1945, under experimental jurisdiction. When questioned by investigative journalists, Pentagon representatives emphasized that no conclusive evidence of unethical testing had been established. Yet the very existence of the tapes contradicted decades of official denial. An internal Fort Detrick log from 1948 titled Equipment Disposal. Psychlab 2 contained a line reading Red Room Chamber decommissioned, instruments repurposed for sensory trials. The equipment serial numbers from that report matched those visible in the 1944-48 footage. Dr. Leclerc's independent analysis revealed a more troubling connection. Among the paper records accompanying the microfilm was a memo addressed to Project Monarch Liaison, CIA Behavioral Sciences, dated 1953, 5 years after the last Red Room experiment. It referenced continuation of Omega protocols under MK operations. The signature was illegible, but the letterhead read, Office of Scientific Intelligence. This was the earliest known reference linking military medical trials directly to the CIA's mind control research, years before such programs became public knowledge. In December 2023, the National Archives conducted a full audit of Fort Detrick holdings. They discovered that over 60 linear feet of documents from the 1940s had been marked for destruction under Routine Schedule A2 during the 1970s. The files destroyed corresponded almost exactly with the period referenced in the Red Room logs. A whistleblower within the Department of Defense, speaking under condition of anonymity, claimed that the shredding order was authorized under Executive Directive 10107B, a classification protocol allowing selective elimination of ethically sensitive records. The date of authorization, March 1975, the same year the Church Committee began investigating CIA human experiments. Despite the missing files, forensic analysts continued decoding the microfilm frames. The 14th reel, RR14, offered a final haunting clue. At the 23-minute mark, the camera pans to a clipboard lying on a metal table. On it is a list of subject codes, 01 through 025, next to 019. A handwritten note reads, non-compliant, sedative increased, and below in faint pencil, transferred to naval custody, 1247, cross-referencing. Naval medical archives from that period revealed the existence of Project Seaside, a behavioral endurance trial conducted aboard the USS Trenton off the coast of Maryland. No participant records survive. Today, the Red Room materials remain in secure storage under National Security Archive control, officially classified as evidence of unknown origin. Requests for further declassification have been denied, citing national interest. In 2024, an internal investigator named Thomas Hollander, part of the Horizon Deep Task Force, leaked fragments of his report before resigning. His final memo stated, Red Room was not an isolated atrocity. It was a bridge between the war's end and the birth of psychological warfare as policy. What began as interrogation resistance training became a study in obedience. The subjects were not volunteers, they were proof. Among the recovered microfilm boxes was one final artifact, nearly overlooked, a small index card tucked inside the lid of real RR1. It bore only a short handwritten note, written in blue ink, faded almost to invisibility. It read, "To whoever finds this, remember, the human mind breaks the same way glass does, quietly and all at once. No author, no date. Just a message left by someone who had seen what the Red Room truly was." That note now rests, sealed in plastic, in a restricted evidence locker at Fort Belvoir. Its catalogue number is Omega DET 2307, and though it carries no official designation, archivists have given it an informal name that passes quietly between them when the doors are locked: the Warning. Chapter 4. Echoes from the Baltic Deep. The sonar operators aboard the Estonian survey vessel Mare Polaris thought it was a false reading. It was April 2020, and the crew was mapping post-Cold War wrecks near the Gulf of Finland when the scanner lit up with a rectangular anomaly 180 meters below. At first glance, it appeared to be the remnants of a downed submarine, Soviet, possibly from the late 1970s. But the angles were too precise, the structure too symmetrical. The coordinates, 59.283 degree N, 24,500 degree E, placed it squarely within an exclusion zone long abandoned since the fall of the USSR. When divers descended, they found not a wreck, but a sealed installation, its surface covered in layers of calcified silt. Bolted to the corroded metal door was a single word in Cyrillic: Okean 7. Inside, the divers' lamps illuminated an array of rusted consoles, tangled wires, and reel-to-reel equipment. Along the walls were racks of magnetic tape canisters, many still labeled with wax pencil notations, frequencies, dates, and military codes. The air smelled of oil and salt. Later examination confirmed that the site was not a submarine at all, but part of a classified underwater listening network, one of several rumored nodes of the Soviet Okean 7 acoustic array, a vast sonar chain meant to track NATO submarines during the height of the Cold War. Its existence had been whispered about in naval circles but never proven. What no one expected was what the recovered tapes contained. After the Estonian Maritime Administration notified NATO's Submarine Rescue and Research Unit, the site was placed under joint investigation. A multinational archival team led by acoustic engineer Dr. Johanna Rist began restoring the waterlogged recordings. The first intelligible tape, labeled Session 9, November 1963, contained the expected sonar pings, interspersed with background mechanical hums. But after several hours of playback, the frequency shifted. A pattern emerged, a deep, rhythmic pulse repeating at precise intervals, too uniform to be natural, yet unlike any known vessel's signature. The data log attached to the reel bore the handwritten note, Sub-event number 3, confirmed detonation. Yet no detonation of any kind, nuclear, chemical, or conventional, was recorded by any global monitoring system at that date. The deeper they listened, the stranger it became. Tapes spanning from 1961 to 1985 revealed a series of similar low-frequency anomalies. Each occurrence corresponded roughly with known nuclear test moratoriums, as though the Soviet Navy had continued secret detonations beneath the sea in defiance of treaties, or perhaps had recorded someone else's. Cross-referencing, the coordinates from the Okean 7 tapes with British Admiralty archives uncovered previously classified reports referencing phantom detonations detected by Western hydrophones in the same period. The British file ADM-HYD 72 described consistent anomalies suggestive of controlled underwater explosions unacknowledged by either superpower. The document ended with a chilling line: source unconfirmed, but evidence indicates recurrence in Baltic Grid C7 sector. Recommend increased surveillance. The installation's construction blueprints, recovered from Russian naval archives by independent researchers, were stamped with the code Minmorflot Directive 16-52, dating to 1959. It outlined an underwater array capable of acoustic triangulation across 800 kilometers of seabed. However, the directive's appendix, classified Level 5 State Defense Secret, included references to intrastructural signal modulation experiments. That phrase had no precedent in Soviet naval terminology, Decrypted by historians, it appeared to describe not mere listening, but active sound projection, experiments to transmit coded frequencies through the ocean floor itself. A translation of one memorandum, addressed to the Ministry of Shipbuilding Industry, read, "Project Goal, utilization of low-band resonance for deterrent signal propagation. Duration, indefinite. Personnel, 6. In 2021, as the tapes were catalogued in Tallinn, several reels disappeared from the evidence archive. When questioned, local officials claimed a clerical error. Months later, fragments of the missing audio surfaced anonymously on an encrypted file-sharing network used by oceanographic researchers. The file was titled Echo 1968 RAW. Acoustic analysis showed it contained a complex layered tone structure, subharmonics resembling human vocal frequencies. Within the noise was a faint, intermittent code pattern matching Soviet naval Morse. When decrypted, the fragments formed a repeating sequence. Test, complete, no response. International media picked up the story briefly before it was suppressed under diplomatic pressure. The Russian Ministry of Defense issued a statement dismissing the recordings as fabricated Western propaganda, yet independent verification from Sweden's Uppsala Acoustic Observatory confirmed the authenticity of the magnetic tape medium and the Soviet origin of its labels. Digging deeper into the Ocean 7 records, Dr. Rist's team found maintenance logs referencing Object 74D, a classified adjunct to the primary array. The log listed installation dates in 1962, crew rotations, and 2 cryptic entries under the incident column: signal loss after row 42 hours, and unidentified source initiated ping. In the margin, someone had scribbled, "We are not alone on this frequency." What that meant remains debated. One theory, supported by declassified NATO memoranda, suggests that both blocks were secretly experimenting with acoustic communication between submerged installations, essentially underwater signaling warfare. The discovery of 74D, if confirmed, would imply direct attempts at cross-interference between Soviet and NATO sonar systems, an underwater shadow war fought with sound rather than torpedoes. In late 2022, the Mare Polaris returned to the site accompanied by a NATO inspection submersible. Using modern imaging, they discovered a sealed inner chamber beneath the original complex. Inside lay several more canisters, remarkably preserved, labeled Ocean Archive, Baltic Node 7, Directive Terminated 1986. Among them was a thick binder enclosed in plastic, stamped USSR, Minoboronie, Do Not Duplicate. The binder's first page bore a typewritten title, Protocol of Acoustic Containment. It contained transcripts of internal communications between officers stationed at Node 7 and command posts in Kaliningrad. The language was clinical, procedural, but one section stood out. May 1965. Experiment concluded. Recorded amplitude exceeded safe threshold. Personnel withdrawal initiated. Command ordered sealing of Node 7. Acoustic resonance persists. Advise permanent deactivation. Yet the logs continued for another 3 months, signed by a Captain V. Orloff. The final entry read only, "Resonance remains. Frequency autonomous. Orders received. Abandon." Subsequent dives confirmed that portions of the array had collapsed inward, as if from an implosion. However, sensors deployed in 2023 by the Swedish Maritime Administration still detected faint oscillations at 12 Hz, emanating from the same coordinates, an unexplained acoustic phenomenon known locally as the Baltic Pulse. Attempts to triangulate the source have been inconclusive. Some attribute it to natural geological resonance, others whisper that Ocean 7's core systems remain somehow active, humming in the dark, long after their creators sealed them away. The recovered binder now resides in the Estonian National Archives. Reference code Ian Mill OK7 2020. Access is restricted to joint NATO-Russian oversight, though researchers report that several pages are missing, torn, not removed. In the margins of the surviving pages, faint pencil marks form a repeated pattern. 3 short strokes, 1 long, an old naval distress code. In the final analysis file prepared by Dr. Rist before her resignation in 2024, she wrote, "We built machines to listen for war, but they ended up listening to the planet itself. The ocean remembers every detonation, every tremor, every word spoken into it. Perhaps Ocean 7 never stopped recording. perhaps it is still waiting for someone to reply. When journalists asked what became of the original audio reels, Estonian officials gave a curt answer: returned to originating state. No one specified which one. As the Baltic winds sweep across the frozen harbours today, fishermen sometimes report hearing faint pulses through their hulls, steady, deliberate, like a heartbeat under the waves. Maritime authorities dismiss them as sonar interference, but the locals have another name for it, one whispered quietly in coastal taverns: the red signal. And whether it's the echo of machines long dead or something that was never turned off, one truth remains certain: the sea never forgets what we hide beneath it. Chapter 5: Operation Glass. Veil, the Prague cache. The discovery began by accident. An urban development survey in Prague's Žižkov district in late 2018, when construction crews unearthed an unregistered sub-basement beneath an abandoned textile warehouse. The air that escaped was dry and metallic, untouched for decades. The workers expected debris, perhaps a wartime shelter. Instead, they found a sealed, lead-lined chamber, its door bolted from the inside. On the inner panel, painted in flaking white Cyrillic, were the words "Stekляная вуаль," glass veil. Inside the chamber stood dozens of lead containers, each stamped with radiation hazard symbols and numbered sequentially, GV01 through GV312. The Czech Radiation Safety Authority was called in. When the first box was opened under controlled conditions, they found not radioactive waste, but tightly packed photo negatives, microfilm reels, and envelopes of encrypted documents. Within days, Prague police cordoned off the building. Within weeks, intelligence officers arrived quietly, without uniforms. The cache would later be identified as the long-lost archive of a Cold War espionage operation run by the Czechoslovak State Security Service, known internally as Operace Skleněný závoj, Operation Glass Veil. The archive's existence had been rumoured among historians for years, whispered about as one of the last unresolved secrets of the Warsaw Pact. According to the recovered index cards, Glass Veil began in 1952 as a covert research initiative under Department X7, specialising in cultural intelligence exchange. In reality, it was a sweeping infiltration network that embedded agents and scientists within Western academic and technological institutions under the guise of cultural diplomacy. The project's objective: to exfiltrate scientific data from Western Europe and the United States and reroute it into Soviet-aligned research pipelines. Among the thousands of negatives were surveillance photographs of radar arrays, laboratory blueprints, and faces of men and women identified only by code names: Magister, Havelka, Orion, Mina. The photographs' backmarkings indicated they were taken in locations ranging from Cambridge and Zurich to Los Alamos. A forensic examination by Czech archivists later revealed that many of the images had been developed on Kodak stock available only through US government contractors, implying that Glass Veil agents had access to restricted materials deep within American facilities. One microfilm reel contained transcripts of encoded telex communications between Prague and East Berlin. The cipher was broken in early 2020 by a team from Charles University, revealing messages referencing Veil Liaison 1254 and Relay Obsidian, terms unknown in any other Cold War lexicon. When historians correlated the names with declassified CIA cables, they discovered a disturbing pattern. Several US physicists who had vanished or defected during the early 1950s, officially presumed to have fled voluntarily, were listed in the Czech files as assets in position. Among them was Dr. Harold F. Kittering, a Los Alamos researcher who disappeared in 1954. His personnel file in US archives ended abruptly with a single word: reassigned. The Prague documents told another story. A photograph dated October 1957 showed Kittering in a laboratory labelled Ústav fyzikálních studií, Praha, the Institute for Physical Studies, wearing a lab coat with no insignia. Further examination of the cache revealed internal memoranda referencing something called mirror phase. According to the documents, mirror phase was an initiative to reverse engineer Western advancements in computer engineering, specifically early transistor and cryptographic systems, by funneling intelligence through academic exchange programs. The operation structure resembled a closed feedback loop. Stolen data from the West fed into state research institutes, which then generated new discoveries that were fed back into international collaborations. effectively laundering espionage into innovation. The archives contained even more chilling evidence. Letters exchanged between Czechoslovak and East German officials describing identity reassignment for high-value assets, complete with falsified birth records and passports. This suggested that some captured or coerced scientists had been reintroduced into Western society under new identities, serving both blocs simultaneously. By 2021, a multinational investigative group formed under the European Historical Reconciliation Initiative began cataloguing the recovered materials. Their internal report, EHI 21 CZ Glass, concluded that Operation Glass Veil represented the most extensive and technically sophisticated infiltration of Western scientific networks ever documented. Among the report's annexes was a decrypted directive from 1963 ordering the destruction of all operational records and relocation of key files to Facility Delta. Analysts suspect that the Žižkov cache was Facility Delta, an archive built to survive both political collapse and historical scrutiny. Its lead shielding and construction materials match those of military-grade storage used by the Czechoslovak Nuclear Institute, suggesting an intent to preserve the contents for generations. The deeper researchers delved, the clearer it became that the archive's existence had been systematically erased from official memory. The Czech National Archives contain no reference to Operation Glass Veil, and state security records for Department X7 ended abruptly in 1968, the year of the Prague Spring. Yet the Prague cache included documents dated as late as 1983, proof that the operation continued long after its supposed dissolution. Among the later materials were Polaroid photographs of computer terminals, schematics for early digital switching systems, and printouts containing what appeared to be binary cipher sequences. A handwritten note stapled to one of the printouts read, "Transmission tested successfully. Target unaware." In 2022, data analysts discovered something extraordinary. When the binary patterns from the 1983 documents were converted into modern ASCII encoding, they formed partial segments of an encryption key identical to one used in a cyber espionage framework uncovered in 2003. The Sableworm intrusion set, linked to Russian intelligence. The similarity was beyond coincidence. It implied that methodologies developed under Glass Veil in the early 1980s had survived the Cold War and evolved into the digital espionage age. The Prague cache was not merely a relic of history, it was a blueprint for modern intelligence warfare. As word of the discovery spread, the Czech Ministry of the Interior classified the entire cache under national security protocols. Journalists attempting to report on the findings received cease and desist orders. Dr. Lucy Hruba, one of the principal archivists involved, resigned after receiving anonymous threats. In her final published statement, she wrote, "History does not end when documents are sealed. It ends when we stop looking." 2 months later, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen except her research drives. Today, the warehouse at Žižkov remains sealed under government supervision. A single brass plaque outside identifies it as property of the Ministry of Culture, restricted archive. The street outside is quiet, yet locals claim that at night, lights still flicker behind the boarded windows, as if someone continues to work inside. The surviving analysts who studied the cache maintain that the final document, catalogued GV312, was the most revealing. It was a typed memorandum, unsigned, dated May 1984. The text read, "Phase transition achieved. Liaison network successfully modernized. Future communication will occur through digital mediums, independent of state oversight." Veil remains intact. No one knows who wrote it. If genuine, it suggests that the architects of Operation Glass Veil foresaw the collapse of the Soviet bloc and adapted accordingly, embedding themselves not in governments but in the emerging structures of global information systems. The idea that Cold War espionage techniques could seamlessly migrate into cyberspace is no longer speculation. It is documented fact, found in a forgotten cellar beneath a crumbling warehouse. Somewhere in Prague's official archives, under lock and cipher, rests a final microfilm reel labeled GV313 Continuation Directive. Its contents remain unreleased. Rumors persist that it contains the names of individuals, scientists, businessmen, perhaps even current officials, whose professional lineages trace back to Glass Veil's covert network. Until that reel is opened, one truth endures, printed in fading ink across the top of the 1952 founding charter of the operation. Invisibility is the highest form of intelligence. And so the veil remains, glass, transparent, unseen, but everywhere,